All right, welcome to a brief discussion on the GAP and PACE programs through the Iowa Department of Education Division of Community Colleges and Workforce Preparation. GAP is not an acronym for anything other than the gap in funding for the individual to receive the funding. PACE stands for Pathway for Academic, Career, and Employment. We'll start with a GAP overview. It's legislated in state code as 260I. And it's funding that helps to cover or fill in the gap for short-term non-credit training that federal dollars cannot cover, hence the gap. GAP language was passed into law during the 2012 session. And GAP language is very, very specific on what can be covered. It is tuition-based. And more information can be found on our website. If you go to educate.iowa.gov, go to that Adult Career and Community College tab up at the top. And then on the left-hand side, you get an Iowa Skilled Workforce and Job Creation Fund, where there'll be more information about the specifics of the GAP program. Also, the actual GAP approved programs can be found on that same website. Click on the Community Colleges tab and then go into the GAP Assistance Program. And it has a monthly updated GAP approved program listing. So as we move forward, it's just important to note that both GAP and PACE are considered complementary legislation, or what you could call sister legislation, whereas GAP can provide for the non-credit tuition portion of that, such as welding or CNA or CDL, truck driving logistics types of non-credit programming. And what PACE does is it comes in and helps provide those wraparound support services. So those support services can be many, many different things since it is broadly written, and we can discuss that a little further. But both programs are administered by each of the community colleges in Iowa. All 15 community colleges have a GAP and PACE program. So the purpose and intent of GAP is it's funding that helps to cover or fill in the gap for short-term non-credit training that federal dollars cannot cover. It's there to assist individuals living between the 150 and 250% level of the poverty line. And really the idea is that it helps to get that individual to create a career pathway for themselves and a pipeline for in-demand employment, a pipeline for employers. And again, as you move through and you look at some of the information online about GAP, you'll find that it is very, very specific. Eligibility for the GAP program, it is assessed through a very thorough and somewhat intense intake and interview process. Part of the eligibility process includes completing the National Career Readiness Certificate, the NCRC, which is an assessment. They have to score at least a bronze level. Other eligibility requirements include, but are not limited to, the applicant's family income currently for the past 6 months prior to the date of application. Also includes the applicant's family size, and then, of course, the applicant's county of residence. So all of the eligibility requirements are listed on the state website. Some of these requirements may be subject to change at some point, depending on how legislation is written or rewritten. It can include other intangible factors as it's on a case-by-case basis. But do note that income is the primary eligibility requirement for GAP. Also, currently to be GAP eligible, the individual does need to take that National Career Readiness Certificate, commonly called the NCRC exam, and score that at that bronze level. But at some point, we may look at different types of assessment to complete that eligibility requirement. So some of the services and benefits through GAP include having other resources made available to the candidate. Also, benefits can include certifications, licensures, or completion certificate in an in-demand industry. Employment and earning a living wage is really the goal of the GAP tuition assistance program. But other services, they're wide and varied depending on what that community college can offer, who those individuals are that are working with that specific client. But some things that they get help with would be FAFSA applications, any other types of specific community college assistance programs within that community college. Obviously, other Iowa workforce benefits, human services benefits. Also, you'll have access to any local assistance agencies that can help out that individual. So, as far as partnering and making referrals for the GAP program, it really is an integral component of the GAP program. It's so important to make good referrals and have excellent partners and have a really good working relationship with them, because that's going to really gauge success, not for the GAP program, but for the individual. This is certainly not an exhaustive list of partners, but they are not limited to Iowa Workforce Development, Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation Services, the Iowa Department for the Blind, Iowa Department of Human Services, public health, any local industry and any local employers, and it can also be on a statewide level. It doesn't necessarily have to be local. Any community-based organizations that are set up to assist and work with folks who present with the greatest barriers to education and employment. And of course, any other state, county, municipal agencies and local partners as well. The idea with referrals is that as you work with these individuals, as you work with these programs, you do begin to engage those partners. You get to know who works on what program and who does what. One of the things that kind of came from the reauthorization that created WIOA was that really referrals, it shouldn't matter who gets the credit for doing what, that the individual going through these programs should have a seamless experience. So it doesn't matter who's providing them with these services, that the handoffs, these really should be good, hard handoffs, that they should be to specific partners for specific programs, and typically with a specific individual in mind to help that person. So the more we're able to put them in front of someone who can get them moving along that career pathway into that education and employment service, that's where really we want to be. So the last slide on GAP is really to give you the list of contacts. It's updated as often as we need to. Again, you can find it at Educate Iowa, and then there's a documents page for PACE and GAP, where the most recent document is for PACE and GAP contacts. Oftentimes they're the same person, but not always. So I want to move on to the PACE overview. So again, PACE stands for Pathways for Academic, Career, and Employment. It's written into legislation. It's 260H, specifically to provide funding to community colleges for the development of projects, coordination with the Economic Development Authority, the Department of Education, the Department of Workforce Development, local workforce development boards established pursuant to Section 84A4, and community partners to implement a simplified, streamlined, and comprehensive process, along with customized support services to enable eligible participants to acquire effective academic and employment training to secure gainful, quality, and in-state employment. So PACE was also talked about and discussed at the same time GAP was back in the 2012 session. The appropriation wasn't made for PACE until the 2014 session. And again, PACE language, if you want to look at it, you can go to our website and or look up the Section 260H, that it is an interestingly broadly written piece of legislation to really allow a lot of different types of wraparound services. And those are services that GAP can't pay for. So GAP is only going to pay for tuition, or PACE is going to be able to pay for a gas card, will help pay for child care. It might be able to help pay for safety glasses or a uniform or perhaps even a background check. So those are the types of things that PACE was built in to kind of support that individual as they're going through the GAP program. Again, the purpose and intent, talked about this, is that it's really established for projects that are going to lead to that gainful quality in state employment for members of that target population by providing them with both effective academic and employment training to ensure that gainful employment, customized services, customized support services. But again, it's the way it's written, and if you go in and look at 268, it just has a very broad legislative perspective, so it can complement those gap programs and really structure and stabilize that individual as they go through these programs. So for purpose and intent, individuals included in target populations are those individuals who meet one or more of the following. So they're deemed to be, by definition, to be low skilled, earn incomes at or below the 250% of the federal poverty level, are unemployed, are underemployed, and or are dislocated workers. So regarding program eligibility, which is a little bit different than client eligibility. So eligibility requirements include the same processes as GAP, although to receive PACE funding, you do not need to take the NCRC. It's not a requirement. Also, PACE can assist in funding GAP non-credit programs, so that can also help fund programs on the credit side. Other types of assessments are typically utilized for PACE, just to kind of find out where individuals are, where they might be on an employment perspective, or they might be on an educational perspective. Again, the idea is to really find out what's going on in their life, where are they at this particular point in time, provide some amount of stabilization so you can begin to structure them on an educational and employment career pathway. So more on eligibility. So projects eligible for funding for PACE are projects that further the ability of the member of the target population to secure that gainful quality employment. Also, that furthers partnerships linking community colleges to industry and nonprofit organizations that further the following program outcomes. So it enables members of the target population to acquire and demonstrate competency in basic skills, acquire and demonstrate competency in a specific or in a specified technical field, complete a specified level of post-secondary education, earn a national career readiness certificate, but again, not a requirement for PACE eligibility, but they certainly can take that. And employers do utilize that as they place employees within their industry. They can also obtain employer-validated credentials, secure gainful employment in high-quality local jobs. Also, another criteria would be to meet the economic and employment goals, including but not limited to meeting those current labor market needs of industry partners in areas included but not limited to the fields of information technology, healthcare, advanced manufacturing, transportation, and logistics, and then any other industry designated as in demand by a regional advisory board. So as you can see by this slide, that all of the programs are tied into a kind of a local partner involvement with an educational and employment initiative. So a little bit on the services and benefits offered by PACE. They are wide and varied, as I've said before. Again, the idea is to assist the individual by providing needed resources given their current employment and educational situation, to provide a structure for education and employment based off of that career pathway. Again, the idea is to stabilize the person and then assist them in structuring their employment journey based on a chosen career pathway. With PACE, everything is on a case-by-case basis. Again, services can include assistance for daycare, transportation, interview close. Basically, the navigators for both GAP and PACE have the ability to really look into the individual situation and decide what's the best course and path to help and assist them. So with partnering and making referrals, as with GAP, partnering and making referrals is an integral component of the PACE program. It's really the most essential piece to make it successful, not for the program, but for that individual going through the program. That's where the success lays. Partners include, again, but are not limited to what we've talked about before: Iowa Workforce, Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation Services, Iowa Department for the Blind, and again, any of those local industries and employers and those community-based organizations, the CBOs, any state, county, and municipal agencies as well. And note again here that referrals should be those good, hard handoffs to specific partners, to specific programs, to those individuals who are in charge of them. It's really good to note that both PACE and GAP currently are looked at nationally as model programs and as a best practice for filling skilled labor needs and the in-demand jobs gap. I do wish that you would contact me if you would like to learn more about Iowa's national perspectives and for articles pertaining to the success of PACE and GAP, as well as any examples of the successful graduates that have gone through both programs. You can find current program reports showing analysis and outcomes, again, on our Educate Iowa, and go to that skilled worker webpage. Again, these are where you can find those PACE and GAP navigators. And if you do need to contact me, I am Mike Williams. I am at mike.williams@iowa.gov, and I'm at 515-725-2005. Give me a call or email me, and I can help with more resources.